Dr. Diana Semjonov, ND, received a degree in engineering from the University of Toronto before she went on to study naturopathic medicine. And as a naturopathic doctor, Dr. Diana takes a special focus on, among other things, gastrointestinal health and stress reduction. And her clinical practice is a shining example of implementing innovation and the latest research to bridge the gap between modern medicine and the wisdom of traditional medicine.
Watch this.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Diana Semjonov. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I am a brain spanner because I love to promote health, and I see the connection between brain health and gut health almost every day in my practice. And I understand that how you think and feel ultimately determines our quality of life as we go through life. And so taking care of that master organ, our brain, is super important.
And here she is, Dr. Diana Semjonov, naturopathic doctor who focuses on the gut brain, as you just heard. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's our pleasure entirely. So, just before we get into our line of questioning, give us a little bit more of a deep dive into the types of patients that you see on a daily basis.
So the majority of the patients that I see do have digestive health concerns. So that's practically my focus in my practice. And of course, I'm noticing that digestion is intimately connected with a variety of conditions. So I see anything from skin conditions to mental health issues and anxiety. There's a big connection between gut health and almost a lot of conditions. So
I like to refer to these guys. I mean, we're becoming more and more familiar as a society, if we're interested in our health, with the microbiome, these little bacteria that seem to confer health benefit. I refer to them affectionately as little puppeteers. They send all kinds of signals out to our general circulation, as well as confer, information to various nerves into the brain. We're learning so much more about this. But let's start off with how you would define the difference between, generic probiotics and psychobiotics, a term that a lot of folks may not be so familiar with.
Yeah, so this is a relatively new term. So probiotics have a variety of health benefits, but psychobiotics specifically are a class of probiotics that influence how we think, how we feel, and ultimately how we behave. So they influence our brain. So the gut is often called the second brain, right? Most of our serotonin is actually made in the gut. And I don't know if a lot of people knew that, but it is. And it's not surprising then that our gut flora ultimately determines the neurotransmitters that affect our brain. And there's now multiple studies out there showing this intricate connection between the gut and the brain and mood issues such as anxiety and depression.
Dr. Diana, we talk a lot about the gut-brain connection here on Brain Spanners. So is it true that the microbiome and the gut are communicating with the brain, and the brain is always communicating with the gut and the microbiome?
Yes, that is true. There's this bidirectional superhighway called the gut-brain axis with plenty of speeding traffic. It represents these chemical signals between the brain and the digestive system. And these signals are very important for our autonomic nervous system, which is responsible for our heart beating and our breathing, our endocrine system, our hormones, and our immune system. So some of our viewers may have experienced those butterflies in their stomach before a presentation, or they may have felt nauseous before a stressful event or during a stressful event. So that's your gut communicating with your brain. And it's bidirectional, which means it goes the other way as well. So a big example of that is serotonin. It's the neurotransmitter that makes us happy. It's our happy molecule, and it's integral to mood and well-being. And it's mostly made in the gut and then delivered to the brain.
So psychobiotics, just defined it really well for us. And then this two-way bidirectional highway. So folks are starting to understand that there's no sort of one right or best probiotic. Rather, there are probiotics by strain and species, fingerprints we call them, that confer specific health benefit. And so, if you could define for us through this sort of sub-classification of psychobiotics, because there's the probiotics that help with irritable bowel syndrome or post-antibiotic associated diarrhea or maybe C. difficile, but the psychobiotics, can you define what strains and species folks could take that ultimately do have this mood or behavior, this benefit to our overall serotonergic aspect in our brain? What are we looking for on the bottle?
Yeah, so this is a really great area of research because we're actually getting to the point where we have specific strains that we can identify that affect our mood and behavior. So specifically, I would say for mood and behavior, it's more of a multi-strain approach because the studies show that a multi-strain product tends to work better on like the mood and the behavior. So for example, there was a randomized controlled trial in 2014. It was done on healthy participants, but the idea was to observe mood changes when they took a multi-species probiotic and to see how they responded. So they weren't necessarily depressed already, they were healthy, but just to kind of see what the brain was doing. And what they found was that the healthy individuals taking a multi-species probiotic reduced this cognitive reactivity. So what is cognitive reactivity? It is this process of negative emotion that is triggered by a mood change. So it's this cycle of, feeling bad about feeling bad. So when we start to feel bad, we have this trickling effect in the brain. So taking this multi-species probiotic in the study showed that it reduced those ruminating thoughts or those aggressive thoughts that predispose us to depression.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So what are the strains that have been proven specifically for anxiety and depression?
Yes, good question, Andrea. So the specific strains for anxiety and depression. So there's great research coming out specifically done on specific probiotic strains. So those include Bifidobacterium longum and Lactobacillus helveticus. So there's 3 studies that I'm going to mention. One was done in 2011, where people took these particular strains together for about a month. And those participants that took the probiotic had reduced symptoms of anxiety and depression just after 4 weeks. A randomized controlled trial in 2017 on 44 adults with irritable bowel syndrome, which is quite linked to anxiety and depressive symptoms, showed that Bifidobacterium longum significantly reduced mild to moderate depression. So 64% of the participants saw an improvement versus 32% of controls after 6 weeks. Okay, so this third study that I'm going to mention was actually done on participants with major depressive disorder. So 110 depressed patients were given a probiotic combination with the Bifidobacterium longum and Lactobacillus helveticus for 8 weeks. And what they observed after those 8 weeks is that they had lower symptoms of depression.
Okay, so this is incredible news. So we've got these psychobiotics that are these good for us bacteria, part of our microbiome. Many of us maybe have deficiencies in this to load our systems. Whether or not we have any diagnosed anxiety or depression might actually amplify our serotonin, which Dr. Diana, you say actually exists in higher concentrations in our gut than even our brain. So that's wonderful news. We could all take advantage of this. But even those cohorts that have anxiety, depression, maybe even clinically diagnosed, can be advantaged by this Bifidobacterium longum and this Lactobacillus, what was the strain you said? Lactobacillus?
Helveticus.
Helveticus. That almost sounds like a font type to me. Lactobacillus helveticus. Right. So when we're looking on the bottle, we want to look for those strains and species. And so tell us, is there any other known mechanism of action other than amplifying serotonin that we're starting to research, we're starting to understand when it comes to loading with these good for us strains and species?
Yes, there's actually multiple mechanisms involved. The one that you mentioned is the main one, but anxiety and depression is often linked to inflammation, and probiotics lower inflammation through the immune system, right? So, and the second mechanism of action is we have this superhighway going from our gut to our brain, and it's the vagus nerve. So you can think that, so there's these little neuropods on the gut lining that are constantly serving and sampling the environment of our gut. So they're looking for this delicate balance between the good and the bad bacteria. And as soon as they see an imbalance or they see a gut pathogen or bad bacteria, they start signaling to the vagus nerve alarm signals to the brain. And that tends to have, these anxious symptoms or depressive symptoms. So that's really fascinating. It's the vagus nerve.
That is.
And also, and then also there's some research that says that probiotics, they lower our fight and flight response.
You talked a lot about probiotics today, and we understand good bacteria and its importance, especially when it comes to mood, anxiety, and depression. What else should consumers know, or our viewers, what should they know when they're looking to buy a probiotic?
I'm going to break down the process of picking a good probiotic in the store. So first of all, you want to look for a refrigerated probiotic. The reason being is that you want live bugs. So refrigeration is the best way to put those those beneficial bacteria into hibernation mode until you're ready to use them. The second thing you want to look for is enteric coating. Enteric coating has been proven to protect the live bacteria from stomach acid. Live bacteria don't survive stomach acid without enteric coating. And you really want to flood the gut with live bacteria. That's the whole point. And there's actually been human studies showing, comparing enteric coated probiotics versus non-enteric coating. And they found that enteric coating provided 5 times bacteria in the gut compared to non-enteric coating. So that's the whole point. You want to also look for multi-strain probiotic versus a single strain. The reason being is that, I mentioned a few strains that are beneficial for mental health. But, when you're going to the store, you might not remember the strains that I mentioned, or, they sound really complicated, like you said, Wild. So, choosing a multi-strain probiotic with more than 10 strains, preferably, almost guarantees that you're going to get those strains that are beneficial for mental health.
Okay, so I went shopping at my local health food store. This happens to be one of my favorite, and I think it'll pass the test. It's called Probiotic Intensity. There's 20 billion of a variety of strains and species by New Roots. It just so happens that it contains the Bifidobacterium longum, as well as the Lactobacillus helveticus, that font type, along with a whole bunch of others. Did I pass? Is this good? All right, amazing.
I mean, you have to make sure that they're also in the billion range.
Right, and this one is 20 billion. Amazing.
Check mark.
18 strains. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Diana. And for more information, folks, I want you to visit drdianaND.com. That's N as in naturopathic, D as in doctor.com. Are you doing any social media right now, Dr. Diana?
Yeah, so I am on social media, mostly on Instagram. So my handle is Dr. Diana ND.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for educating us on the role of psychobiotics and mood and behavior. We wish you well in your practice.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you. You know what I find so fascinating is that there are different strains of bacteria for different disorders. So for example, for mood and anxiety or depression, like Dr. Diana talked about, or if you have IBS, which we talked about on the show a couple of times, so I just find that it's really crucial when we are shopping for a probiotic that we understand either we buy that multi-strain formula so that you're kind of hitting a whole bunch of different things, or you're looking for strains that are specific to what you're looking to replace that good bacteria for.
Right, strains that might confer a specific health benefit. Of course, my clinical practice, I play sleuth. I take human stool samples, I send them off to a lab, and there's no more of a guessing game. I can see the phylum, the strain, the species for which the patient is low for. My job is to kill off any offending bacteria, whether it's potentially pathogenic or pathogenic, and then, of course, reintroduce the good strains that seem to be missing. based on the culturing and stool sampling. But I'm really confident that the studies and the human research is going to continue to evolve to the point where we can, just as the evidence that Dr. Diana has shown us, walk into a health food store one day and be very specific about the strain species that confer very deliberate health benefit. We already have a few, just like the ones we talked about today, the psychobiotics, but there's a few others. For example, I'm very impressed with the L. casei bacterium that seems to do a really good job with, defending against C. difficile overgrowth. That's an opportunistic bacteria. Or the general strains of Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidobacterium that help with antibiotic-associated diarrhea. So I'm with you. But these psychobiotics, how cool is that they influence mood and their ability to boost, it seems, serotonin?
Yeah, it's so cool. And you know what? It always comes back at, we're talking about brain spanning, right? We are brain spanners, and our show is called Brain Spanners. And we're always going to go back to that gut brain connection, that vagus nerve. And so many of the guests that we've interviewed on our show up until now have all mentioned the same thing, right? That highway that goes from the brain to the gut and the gut to the brain. So crucial. And that's why taking care of our gut and that good bacteria is so important.
Yeah. And the one thing they find with centenarians, of course, the people that live beyond 100 often, which, come along with healthy brains, gut diversity. Yeah. The diversity of the strains and species that live in the gut. So in North America, with our SAD diet, the standard American diet, that diversity goes down. And of course, those little bugs, the microbiome then is not well balanced, and therefore the impact on the brain is simply not there.
Yeah. Very well said, Bryce. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please give us a big like, and please leave a comment, because we will always answer your questions underneath our video, but also we will answer them as best as we can on future shows.
And thank you so much to New Roots. As I mentioned earlier on, this is one of my favorite probiotics, specifically because it's got on the bottle, can't see that, but when you go shopping, you will, the strains and species relevant to mood behavior enhancement, as we called them today, psychobiotics. And thanks to Dr. Diana for sharing that specific message with us as well.
We'll see you next time.
Ciao.